Welcome everybody to another 10-minute chess opening video. I've been requested to do this by so many people. The English opening with the white pieces. The English starts with the move c4, and the real question is, why would one play the English when you are supposed to play the queen's pawn, the king's pawn early on? Well, first of all, the English cuts back probably 90 to 95% of familiarity for your opponents. So they're used to playing something against d4, against e4. All of a sudden, they have the English. The other thing about the English is that it avoids certain move orders. It can avoid certain openings. For example, if you want to play d4, but you have an opponent who wants to play the Nimzo-Indian with bishop b4, the English avoids that. And it, knight f6, knight c3, e6, now your center is ready and you can play the move e4. Right, and then obviously black here cannot play a Nimzo-Indian, for example. Another example of avoiding a certain opening theory is, for example, in this move order, if let's say they want to play a Grunfeld, you can play e4 and shut that down, and oftentimes this results in you getting a position where they have to play a King's Indian defense. So the English can be used to solve certain move orders, while at the same time allowing you to play more flexibly with potentially g3 and bishop g2. Now, to that point, there are two ways that you can play the English opening. There is the two knights English, where you put two knights in the center of the board. Sometimes you try to push your d-pawn a little bit later. Or there's the English where you immediately play g3, bishop g2, and you actually put this knight on e2. So black can obviously set up in a million different ways. The English doesn't really control the center too much, so black can play e5. This is a reverse Sicilian defense because it's basically like e4, c5, except you're playing the Sicilian and you have an extra move. We actually saw this played a ton between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura in the recently concluded finals. If you haven't caught up on those recaps or those videos, I highly recommend you go look at them. And Magnus played a lot of g3 and bishop g2, but he did play some knight c3, knight f6, and the four knights English, where you can now play moves like e3 to try to play d4 or g3, bishop g2, and so on and so forth. In this video, I'm not going to go into a crazy amount of theory because there is some theory, but I want to intro this whole opening to you and potentially tell you about the overarching themes and plans. So let's say you do get e5, and you can play g3, let's say something like knight f6, and then here you would continue with something like bishop to g2. And again, black can set up in a million different ways. Black can play in the center first. If black plays in the center, you should obviously make this trade and then continue with your development. Consider two fianchettos. At some point, you can play b3, bishop b2. That's also very useful to put some pressure on the center with the bishops, and you will delay your central development for a little bit. If black doesn't play like that, just plays knight c6. You play knight c3, say this bishop goes somewhere, maybe bishop c5, maybe bishop e7, maybe you get a bishop b4. Always consider that you do have moves like knight to d5, but you can decide very early how you want to set up. In this setup, you can play e3, knight e2, just hypothetically speaking, what that might look like, something like this. And then from here, your game plan with white will basically be to complement this bishop and expand on that side of the board. So something like, for example, bishop e6, right? To try to pressure this pawn. Now here you could play b3, but I already did show you that you support that with a knight, you support that with the pawn, the knight and the bishop, and so you could launch that knight into the center and begin to expand with space on the queen side. So again, perfect world, what does that look like? Just to make a few moves here, a3, bishop a5, b4, and so on. Maybe you'll put the rook on b1, for example, and support the advancement of these pawns. Maybe in the future, you will also expand in the center with d4. Very flexible setup. Now, what is a good plan for black? Well, there's going to be positions where black will play something like, bishop f5, and let's say you play this little setup here, and then here you play something like bishop b2. Black will try to play queen d7, an experienced player will do this, and try to trade off your bishop. So a useful maneuver to know there is rook e1. You say, well, how does that prevent this trade? Well, here you can sometimes play the move bishop h1. And so rook e1 has moved the rook, excuse me, out of the way of this dark squared, of the light squared bishop, the black bishop, I should say. Now you hide on e1, h1, not e1. You put the rook on e1, bishop on h1, and you play d4 and try to trap that bishop on b6, take a lot of space, put the knight in the center of the board, and so on. That's one way. But if you want to challenge your opponent's setup, you really have to, with the English, notice very early on how they're trying to set up their pieces. So for me, I actually don't play g3 when I play c4. What I do is my next move is almost always knight c3. So if they play knight f6, I'll play knight c3. I'm looking at how they're developing. If they play e6, I'm going to play e4. If they play e5, then that's fine. That's basically the reverse Sicilian. Now you can go for your g3 thing or your two-knight setup like this. If they play g6, and it's like, oh, well, now I don't want them to play the Grunfeld. I want to play into a King's Indian. So maybe you need a King's Indian line in your repertoire. For example, a line that I like very much in the King's Indian is the two bishop line, where you play bishop e2, castles, and bishop e3. Notice in the English you haven't moved this knight yet. And what this allows you to do is to play g4, h4, h5. So before you even develop your knight, you're already attacking. You're going to play queen d2, maybe bishop h6, and you're trying to put some pressure on a King's Indian player, recognizing how they're playing as the game progresses. It wouldn't be an English video if I didn't tell you about probably the most annoying thing that you'll face in the English, which is the symmetrical English. There are players that just will copy you because maybe they play e4, e5, they play d4, d5. So against the English, they don't really have an opening, so they play c4, c5. That might happen. What I recommend against this is the Botvinnik setup. I believe with the black pieces, that's what it's called, but you can play it with the white pieces as well. Knight c3, and then again, g3, bishop g2, you can get copied the entire way. Now, sometimes here, some of the super grandmasters have experimented with an early h4 push. MVL, Aronian, they'll play like h4. Black might still copy, but then you can transfer your knight to like f4, for example, rather than just developing naturally with knight h3. The symmetrical English is pretty annoying. There's no way around it. It's actually fundamentally one of the drawbacks of playing the English is that they can just copy you and black should be fine. How many people are going to do that against you, I really can't predict, but obviously I should tell you it might happen, and against that you can just try to play on the queen side, rook b1, a3, b4. You can play this early h4 thing. You can play the Botvinnik setup, which I was saying, with e4, and then something like this. So this little carousel, or not carousel, bowl of pawns. I don't know. I was going to say like a little, little carton of pawns. I'm running out of words, all right? It's like 11 o'clock at night when I'm recording this. I'm kind of tired. I don't know why I said carousel. Maybe it's because it like kind of goes like this. Whatever. Let's just move on. Basically, you play something like knight e2, d6, maybe h3 here, so you can put your bishop here, because if you just put your bishop there, we'll attack it, and I'll take it. So you're just trying to keep very solid, very flexible setup. Black plays something like a6, looking for b5. Maybe you castle. Maybe you play queen d2 and go for bishop h6. Your flexibility is unlimited with the English, and oftentimes you will be building up your experience in this opening while they have not faced this so often. Against something that's a little bit more confrontational against this pawn, like e6 or c6, again, you can play g3, d5, and bishop g2. If you've seen my Catalan video, this will be very useful. Giving away this pawn is really not dangerous. You can oftentimes combine the English with the Catalan. If you're interested in playing the English, I highly recommend looking at the Catalan video as well, because the positions are very similar. You'll win this pawn back very easily with moves like queen a4 check, sometimes knight a3, knight c4, and even just knight f3 castles and knight e5 and taking back this pawn, because defending it will result in some damage on this diagonal. The loss of material is probably the most obvious. That's pretty much it. The English it's I don't always recommend it for beginners and intermediate players, because in my opinion there's not enough tactics. But if you're a player who likes a slower game where you don't want to get caught with some stupid opening trap, the English is perfect for you. Hope that helps. I don't really need much more than 10 minutes for this one. A couple of videos are going to appear on that side. You can feel free to check them out. Got a lot of content on this channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Maybe drop me a game that you've played in the English. I'll catch you in the next video.